Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 2024 meeting of the Houston Archaeological Society. My name's Bob Sewell. I'm president of the society. This evening, we have Gerard Roberts to give our presentation. He has an undergraduate degree in anthropology and a master's in archaeology from TSU, and obviously is a professional archaeologist. Gerard Roberts has dedicated over a decade to the study and documentation of rock art in the lower Pecos Canyonlands, meticulously recording over 200 pictograph sites, including iconic locations such as White Shaman, Rattlesnake Canyon, Panther Cave, and Fate Bell Shelter. His contributions to rock art research are extensive, having co-authored numerous papers on advanced documentation methodologies, including PXRF analysis, 3D modeling, and radiocarbon dating. Gerard recently took on the role of project archaeologist at the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project in New Mexico, which has documented over 60,000 petroglyphs, with an estimated 60,000 more yet to be recorded, in the heartland of multiple Puebloan groups in northern New Mexico. His expertise and leadership are further highlighted by his tenure as chair of the Society for American Archaeologists Rock Art Interest Group, the largest within the organization. Gerard's work continues to shape our understanding and preservation of these cultural treasures. Please welcome Gerard Roberts.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I couldn't have said that better myself.
You did say it. You wrote it.
Okay, maybe I could have said it a little bit better there. But anywho, thank you all for letting me speak. I greatly appreciate it. I am terribly sorry that I was not able to make it down to Houston for this. But again, like I said, I have a new job. And also, my anniversary was yesterday. So it was either deciding whether I come down and speak with you or come back to having a wife still. So I think I made the right decision, and we kind of got in between there. But so kind of what I'd like to be talking about is, obviously, my name is Gerard Roberts, and I'm going to be talking about some of my thesis research on the red linear pictographs of the lower Pecos Canyonlands. Before we kind of get into it, I'd like to extend my thanks to my other committee members who kind of made this possible. My committee chair was Dr. Carolyn Boyd, and committee members included Dr. Britt Bausman and Dr. Karen Steelman. They helped me so much along the way, and I think the results that came from this research is something we can all be proud of. One thing I kind of want to get, or before we get going, is I want to just kind of express that rock art is not just this kind of like stepchild of archaeology. We can glean so much information from rock art, and combine it with what we learn with the terrestrial archaeology gives us a bigger picture than we can ever imagine. So just kind of keep that in mind, and hopefully I can express what I'm talking about when I'm talking about merging these two fields or subfields. All right, so this study explores the defining characteristics of red linear style figures and establishes their place in the broader timeline of the lower Pecos rock art through radiocarbon dating. The rationale behind this will soon become clear, but kind of let's review the approach. So first, we're going to start off with an introduction to the project area and the rock art. I'm going to segue into past research on the subject, outline kind of the thesis's objectives, methods, questions, and methodologies. Then we're going to hit on a little bit of the analyses of what we did or what I did. And if y'all are still listening, I'll go ahead and present what we learned, and which I think is pretty neato. So let's get going. For those of you who don't know, the Lower Pecos cultural area is situated around three major rivers: the Pecos River, the Devil's River, and the Rio Grande. This The lower Pecos was initially hinted at by the distinctly beveled Pandale projectile point, but yet is the pictographs themselves, specifically the Pecos River style imagery, that remain the defining boundary. As you can see, the southern border extends well into Coahuila, Mexico, but the details of the extent still remain a little fuzzy. What makes this region particularly enticing to archaeologists is that it provides evidence of 12,000 years of continuous prehistoric hunter gatherer occupation, which is absolutely nuts. The lower Pecos climate has remained relatively arid throughout the majority of the Holocene. This, coupled with the dozens of rock shelters or hundreds of rock shelters across the karstic landscape, really creates excellent grounds for the preservation of perishable materials and, of course, world-class rock art. So the lower Pecos boasts a variety of rock art styles that reflect an extensive cultural history. Notable styles include the Pecos River style, which you all are probably the most familiar with, bold line geometric style, the red monochrome style, historic period imagery, and of course, finally, the red linear style. The red linear style features kind of monochrome anthropomorphic, or what we call human-like figures, engaging in a whole bunch of different group activities, from subsistence practices to communal and sometimes very intimate and private interactions. Primary characteristics of red linear imagery are usually associated with the human figures themselves and include stick bodies with splayed legs. Let me see if I can get a laser pointer going. Can you see that? Stick bodies, splayed legs, sometimes pointed heads, and hooked headdresses like this. Other body type is curvilinear, kind of given the expression of fluidity. The figures are often in kneeling or squatting positions. This is often portrayed or discussed as a birthing scene. And they tend to have pointed and rounded head shapes as well. One of the defining attributes for the style are the biological sex characteristics, such as phalli and vulvas, and also secondary sex characteristics like breasts. Here you can see a wide-bodied anthropomorph, or anth, kind of for short. And in a nutshell, wide-bodied anthropomorphs are stick-bodied, but just with wider bodies. Makes sense. Their legs and arms are kind of still singular lines like the other ones. Figures are also often portrayed with paraphernalia. So like we have atlatls here, rabbit sticks, stick bars, and based on the presence of these atlatls, both the red linear style and the Pecos River style are thought to be produced sometime in the Archaic period. Now, how they actually relate to one another over this period of time is one of the major questions, and it's really just getting even more interesting as we're learning more. So while there are red linear zoomorphs that display characteristics that do allow for stylistic identification, we have these very elongated legs and also elongated appendages. Identification kind of becomes a little bit more trickier without the greater context of what's around them. So hypothetically speaking, if I wanted to radiocarbon date the style or to determine what date that these pictographs were created, I'd probably want to focus on something that had more diagnostics. And that's why I really chose to focus on the human-like figures. The diagnostic attributes associated with red linear anthropomorphs are just kind of easier to identify. In particular, the biological sex markers, such as the phalli pointed here, and then the vulvas, they really only occur in the red linear imagery. Here you can kind of see another red linear style diagnostic, which is the penis emblem or phallus adornment. This is basically a line or two lines extending from the tip of the penis. But all in all, why does this all matter? Well, if you want to be sure what you're studying and you're studying a particular style, you must know its defining characteristics, or else how exactly are you going to identify it, and how are you going to contest people that are telling you that maybe you're not even dating the right style. So it's also in these characteristics where or these attributes where the potential to learn certain aspects and dynamics of a culture that's often near impossible or downright difficult to do uh, with just typical archaeological deposits. It's This is where we're learning a little bit more about the cultural aspects. So now we kind of have a general idea of what the red linear style is. Let's take a look at really what the problem that my research attempted to address. So way back when, first Forrest and Lula Kirkland were the first to really identify the red linear style figures while illustrating rock art at the actually what is now known the type site, the red linear type site. It really wasn't until the 1960s before it was truly typed into a style. When discussing Cueva Quebrada, which was a newly identified red linear site, Terence Greeter interpreted one of the scenes present as depicting a herd of animals, possibly being a deer or a buffalo. So, after a few mentions here and there, red linear discussion didn't truly become much until Solveig Turpin began to really nail down what the red linear style was. And this was in the 1980s. Turpin synthesized previous research done by Greeter, Kirkland, and Newcomb with new data. In that interpretation, partially based on Greeter's mention of the possible bison and knowledge that bison were in the area at one time in the lower Pecos, she proposed that the red linear style occurred during the late Archaic Cibolo subperiod, and that occurred really around 3,000 years ago. Turpin hypothesized that kind of the style was introduced by an intrusion culture that was coming down following the bison herds during that, brief wet time period. And the introduction of the bison in the area and the intrusion were just the factor that also thought was played the end into the Pecos River style. With that kind of going on, excuse me, in 1995, Wayne Ilger, sampled the paint from one of the supposed bison at Cueva Quebrada for radiocarbon dating using a then experimental technique called plasma oxidation, which basically it just extracts the carbon from the paint organics and leaves kind of the carbon from the wall alone. And then that carbon is getting dated through, AMS, kind of your normal radiocarbon dating. The date that they got placed red linear to about 1520 to 920 cal BP. While this date didn't necessarily fall into that Cibolo period that Turpin hypothesized, that date was usually generally used to support the style was associated with bison. And that's where the literature kind of stayed for almost 30 years. One issue with that was that what they dated was an ovoid shape. And as you can see here, this is the actual sample area of it. And that ovoid shape lacks those diagnostic attributes to truly define it as any indie style. It's one of 17 figures, and as you can see, only 4 really exhibit, animal-like elements, and none necessarily display any diagnostics of a bison either, let alone red linear. So, in addition to this, it was the only date done with possible red linear associations. And as the saying goes, one date is no date. That's If you have one date, that's not enough. All right. So, kind of going forward into time, in 2013, Carolyn Boyd and Charles Koenig and Amanda Castaneda, they examined 444 figures across 12 sites that they said had diagnostic red linear attributes. They collected information on all of the human-like figures, including height, body type, color, head shape, patterning, aspect, sex, gender, among others. But it's from that data, Boyd et al. Kind of identified multiple diagnostics that were attributable to red linear style. In addition to this, they also noted 38 stratigraphic occurrences where red linear figures were underneath Pecos River style imagery. And as we all know, that stratigraphically, the things that are underneath are typically the things that are older. We don't know necessarily how much older, but we know that they're at least older than or contemporaneous with. So that kind of changed where red linear style fits on the chronological timeline. But so what happened really was this new data challenged that previous assumption that the red linear was more recent in time. However, that general consensus is still up in the air. Even though there's solid stratigraphic evidence, there's just something about radiocarbon dating that people really hold on to, even if it's something that's non-diagnostic. And that's the problem that I intended to shed my light onto. There are data to suggest that red linear style is older than Pecos River style, and data to suggest it's more recent. To address this, my main questions were pretty straightforward. What is red linear style? What are the patterns that connect one red linear site to another? What are the differences or variations within those sites? And that will help me kind of formulate and tackle the next question. And that is, when was red linear style produced? Does it occur during that presence of bison or intrusionary groups into the area? Or does it occur deeper in time, as the Boyd et al. Paper kind of suggested? Also, how does it relate to the other styles in the Lower Pecos? Does it coincide with other rock art? Are each styles representative of different cultures? To begin even tackling something like that, it was just clear that direct and absolute dating methods were needed. And luckily, that plasma oxidation technique has come up absolutely a long way since that 1995 Ilger et al. Is considered fairly reliable for radiocarbon dating pictographs with organic carbon or with organic content. So I also needed to make sure what I was dating was in fact red linear style, since diagnostic attributes are easier to identify in the anthropomorphs as opposed to the animal-like figures. That's what I decided to focus in on. For my data set, I turned to Shumla's recent work on the Alexandria project. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, in 2017, Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center began the Alexandria project, which was conducting baseline data over 200 rock art sites in the Lower Pecos. This project was guided by many research questions and kind of developed to answer many more. Its data set was it was astronomically extensive. It had the tech site forums, GPS coordinates, 3D models, high resolution gigapans, basically anything that I needed to really get at what is our current state of knowledge for red linear. And so during the Alexandria project also, we identified 15 additional red linear sites and recorded them, and they all contain those diagnostic attributes. And so, addition to those 10 sites, we kind of had an entire sample of red linear style sites that was comprised of 25 sites. So that's the most comprehensive known collection of red linear sites that we have to date from any collection. However, the project data was kind of still in its raw form. And so I had to end up combing through terabytes and terabytes of gigapan imagery, which like each image was probably 50 or 60 gigabytes large. It took some time. It took probably more time than I should on my thesis, but again, it worked out. But anywho, each identified figure was given a unique identifier, and that was tied to its trinomial, and the attributes were kind of all of these attributes here were identified for each one of those anthropomorphs, and I put it on a giant Excel spreadsheet. So while this really took up most of my time for my thesis, it really proved to be way more fruitful than I could have ever imagined. And again, took more time, but that's fine. So by the end of it, my sample size consisted of 338 newly identified figures, which effectively doubled the known red linear style anthropomorphs ever documented. Combining this with the 2013 sample, Boyd et al., I had a total sample size of 614 red linear anthropomorphs, which is a good sample size, almost population size. So including in that sample was 25 sites spanning the entire Lower Pecos region. So as you can see, it's pretty much we have just as many red linear sites here on the Devils River as we do on the Pecos and Rio Grande over here. Now you can see that there's a small gap down here, but that's just because of Lake Amistad was built, and whatever was there was likely lost or inundated. So one of the first things I did after cleaning up the data was trying to compare it from sample to sample. I do not expect you to really understand or look at this and try to piece it together. But what I want you to kind of glean is every single body type or attribute here, what I found in my sample was equivalent or the most likely of the other sample in Boyd et al. So I expected the frequencies to be different because they're two different sample sizes. But what I found out was we are seeing same percentages of certain attributes across the entire landscape. And that's badass. Because that's just saying that we have a clear, identifiable, and understandable. We understand the attributes that are associated with red linear. We've kind of nailed the style. That's a black screen. Okay, so this is just kind of showing you that the frequencies that Boyd et al. Said was of the same frequencies that I found. This high R squared number just basically means that you can account for one, or my sample is predictable by the numbers that Boyd et al. Found. And that's also just a high number means we're doing good data. We're doing good data collection, and we have a clear understanding of what red linear style is. It's predictable, which that's what you want in the style. It's predictability. But so kind of with all of this data that I collected, here are the most frequent attributes, kind of what defines a red linear style. If you were to pick one figure out of a whole bunch of them, this is what you would likely find. You would likely find an average height of about 8 centimeters, an average width of about 3 centimeters. The paint color is most likely red. We do have blacks, yellows, and whites, but they're mostly red. You're most likely going to find that stick body, that thin positioning. It's going to be standing. The head shape is going to be pointed. It's also going to likely be facing right, which is very interesting that most of them were facing right. They're also going to most likely have a phallus. So all of these kind of give us an idea is if I want to radiocarbon date and understand that style, I need to look at figures or anthropomorphs that exhibit these characteristics. But it got a little bit crazier than that, because as I started dealing with it and doing a little bit of statistics, I'm not going to get into much, but it was a lot of chi-squares. I also found other attributes that were really interesting that nobody's ever really looked at before. All of these numbers, basically, if anything is above 1.96 or below 1.96, that means it's statistically significant. That's all you need to know to really understand this. But what I was looking at was when I found figures with vulvas, they were statistically significant to be more curvilinear bodied. They were more likely to be kneeling. They were more likely to be squatting. They were more likely to be have a kind of a distended belly, and they were more likely to have a skirt, which is kind of a gender marker, but it falls in line with being associated with the sex as well. And then also they were less likely to be stick bodied or standing. So none of that really has been really determined until I did this analysis. On the flip side, for males or ones that have phalli, they were more likely to be wide bodied, they were more likely to be standing, and then less likely to be curvilinear, have that distended belly, which could indicate pregnancy, and also less likely to have skirts. So that all makes sense. But what I didn't kind of understand was there's this kind of unknown sex attribute. There's these anthropomorphs that do not have phalli, they do not have vulvas, but they also exhibit very unique characteristics in themselves. So they were more likely to be stick bodied, but also distended bellies as well, kind of like the females. And then also they were less likely to be wide bodied. This is again just what you need to look at. This is head shape and body type are statistically combined. They're linked together. If you have a bisected head shape, which is basically a circle with one line down the middle, then you're more likely to have a wider body. All of these little attributes that we can actually determine, and that gives us a better picture for what red linear style is. The crazy thing was I was just kind of fiddling with the data and looking at just the average height of your red linear anthropomorph, and kind of looking at it, and I started looking at the trinomials of where those average heights existed on the landscape. And lo and behold, what I found was there was a spatial pattern occurring, and I really didn't want, like, this was kind of a bonus for my thesis that I didn't want to really deal with because it was going to add so much more time, but it just presented itself. And what I found is there is a clear east-west differentiation in height. And so that basically means that we're seeing cultural differentiations within the style, whether they're substyles. That's for more papers to kind of look at, but we were seeing differentiations in the style across the landscape. We had higher anthropomorphic figures in the west along the upper Rio Grande and the Pecos River, and we're seeing smaller stuff on the Devil's River. And that just kind of like that little piece was like, okay, what else is different between the West and East groups? It just kind of opens up. One question leads to another, leads to another. And that's exactly what I found was, as you can see here, all of these just indicate the bigger the circle, the average size of those anthropomorphs are larger. And we see a lot bigger ones over here on the west than we do on the east. We even kind of see a north-south gradation where we have bigger ones, they get smaller, and then we have these bigger ones, and then they continue to get smaller up. So it's not even just a east to west, it's almost like a U shape, which that just needs to be explored, some other time. But that didn't just go to the height. What I started learning is all of the attributes were associated with a distinct east-west boundary. So when I layered those attributes across the landscape, those patterns really just started to emerge. So we're talking about bisected head, circular head with a single line across of it. As you can see here, the clear majority of that attribute is in the West with only a few instances in the East. And it's just not that. It continues. Pointed head shape. So pointed head shape going back is one of those attributes or characteristics that's supposed to define red linear style. And that's kind of what we see here too. We see in this hotspot analysis, we see that there are both heavy concentrations of the attribute both in the east and the west, which is good because that means if you're trying to define something that defines a style, you want to see it kind of averaged across the landscape, and that's what we see. So super cool. With the penis emblems, which has been kind of thought of as a diagnostic attribute or, something that indicates it is the red linear style, what we're saying is it really only indicates a Western pattern. We only see figures with those penis emblems or phallus adornments in the West and not necessarily in the East. Same thing that goes with the central style body styles, kind of the more elaborate designs. We're starting to see basically clear substyles, and that has not been determined up until this point. The wide body, though, even if it's central styled, you have that wider body that can be seen on both the east and west. There's no real clear east-west delineation. Same thing with curvilinear, which is great. That means that that can be still a characteristic that defines red linear style. We see just as many instances in the east as we do in the west. And last but not least, stick body. Another one of those that every single person that talks about red linear, they say that stick body is a diagnostic or it's a clear attribute. If you're looking at a stick body figure, you're likely looking at a red linear figure. And we see no clear delineation between the east and the west here, which is good. That means that we can still say that that is something that has been talked about in the literature and persists. So kind of to result that all up, the west, we have taller figures. We have bisected head shapes. We have that penis emblem, and we have centrostyling as well. So bisected head shapes, penis emblem, centrostyling. That most likely occurs in the west. For the east, we have pointed head shapes as the majority, but other than that, we just have smaller figures in the east. We don't have nearly as many like diagnostic, oh, this must be a Western figure. The East is a little bit more ambiguous, or it just hits your normal diagnostics for red linear. So with all of this, we had a good idea of what red linear style is. And so with that knowledge and the assistance of Karen Steelman and a whole bunch of volunteers, we started tackling sampling and processing some of these figures to see if we can get radiocarbon dates from them. And so using a new 10-chamber plasma oxidation system from the Schumel Archaeological Research and Education Center, we started to tackle that problem. So for radiocarbon dating, I chose 4 distinct sites containing those red linear style figures that has those clear attributes. So nobody can complain that what you were dating was not in fact red linear. And so that was Serenity Overlook, Cueva Quebrada, Continental Red Linear, and Hibiscus Shelter. So we collected paint samples and unpainted background samples nearby and got going. Unfortunately, the samples from Hibiscus Shelter, which was one of them, had high contaminates of carbon that was not part of the figure itself. And so we never really sent that off for AMS dating. The 2 figures from Hibiscus Shelter were chosen because mostly their similarity to another style in the Guadalupe Mountains, which is a topic we'll have to talk about another day. But basically, unfortunately, both samples didn't contain enough carbon, and that's a huge bummer. But that's just kind of the way it is. But in addition to those in addition to those four sites, Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory provided Shumla with a sample from the red linear type site for radiocarbon dating. And we got very lucky with this. And the way that we got lucky was during Turpin's dissertation work, way back when she collected a spall containing a known portion of red linear rock art that was removed from the wall naturally after a hard freeze. And luckily, we were not just able to obtain this figure that was already off the wall, we were able to obtain it from the type site, and we were able to radiocarbon date the calcium oxalates that grew above and below the paint layer. So, as you know, a good stratigraphic sandwich of dates is worth its weight in gold. So here's an illustration of the main panel at the Red Linear Type site. If you haven't been there, it's at Seminole Canyon State Park on the Presa Canyon Tour. Go. It's absolutely amazing. That little white circle basically shows where the focus of the attention is. So pulling that little white circle up, the sample comes from a spall that fell off in the 80s. And luckily Turpin collected it and had it curated at Tarl. So that's where it came from. Abling just kind of did digitally re-put it back from legacy imagery, and then the images that we took from the spall, we were even able to recreate that small portion of the panel itself and know exactly where it was and know what we were dating. And when we dated it, lo and behold, we got some pretty interesting numbers. Both paint samples, 1 and 2, came from the same anthropomorph. And when we combine those two, because we know it was painted at the same time, we got lucky and it does pass a chi-square test, which, further credits that we were actually radiocarbon dating the same thing and we were getting good results. And that just kind of goes to show it's much more older than we anticipated. In addition to that, like I said, we radiocarbon dated both the small growths on top that calcium oxalates, both above and below that paint sample. And we dated it 3 different times. We got 1 date from the top and 2 dates from the bottom. And as you can kind of see in this a little bit complex graph, all of those numbers match up, meaning the most outer level is the most recent, and that's the most recent date, followed by the 2 paint samples, and then followed by the oldest dates were in the underneath oxalates, which is, I couldn't have expected it to work this well. I don't think anybody really could, but lo and behold, it did. And that's pretty dang neat. So turning to Cueva Quebrada, if y'all don't remember, Cueva Quebrada was the little place where the very first red linear or supposed red linear date came from, and that was right here. And my goal was to radiocarbon date the closest red linear anthropomorph in association with that ovoid shape, because my goal was to actually see if I could get the same dates, and because I wanted to see if there was any validity to it. Unfortunately, it didn't. There wasn't. That when we radiocarbon dated, it came back to the 4275 plus or minus 35 radiocarbon years, which matches the dates that we took from the type site, but does not match the dates that were from 1995. So big questions there. Then kind of I wanted to collect samples from the widest variety of red linear anthropomorphs. And so, as I said before, the average red linear anthropomorph was like 8 centimeters. Well, this figure was over half a meter long, but it still had those diagnostic red linear attributes. And so, was this older? Was this newer? Was this not even part of red linear? That's what I kind of wanted to figure out. But when we radiocarbon dated it, it came back in the same date range as all of the other ones that we radiocarbon dated, meaning that the diagnostics or those attributes that we were keying in on were clearly red linear diagnostic attributes. Then finally, we did a site at Serenity Overlook, which is on the Devil's River, which is right behind me here. And what we wanted to see was we dated this twice on two different anthropomorphs. Each one of them is part of a procession, which is kind of another attribute that red linear often has. Is the anthropomorphs are in procession. For the first one, we got 4830 plus or minus 35, right in that same time range, much older than we previously thought at 1280 with the bison herds or the supposed bison herds. And the second one that we dated, also 4775 plus or minus 30 radiocarbon years. Again, these are two different anthropomorphs. The likelihood of them being painted at the same time is very likely, even though we can't say that with very for certain instance because there's just no overlap between them. But they do pass a chi-square test of, so that means that they were or they do fall within the same time period. These also happen to be these two dates happen to be the oldest known radiocarbon dates associated with pictographs in the lower Pecos Canyonlands. Which is at Serenity Overlook. And actually within the region, the southwest region for pictographs. So, in total, 6 radiocarbon dates from anthropomorphs that have attributes that kind of really nail them down as red linear style. We obtained those alongside 3 calcium oxalate dates. And another duplicate sample from the type site. This kind of just all reinforces that reliability of the methodology, which is very important, very crucial. And lo and behold, what this shows is that the red linear style was produced between 4830 and 4275 radiocarbon years, or 5600 to 4655 cal BP. Right at the onset of the Middle Archaic period, and a little bit older than Pecos River style. So, as it sits here, the red linear style is considered a little bit older than the Pecos River style. However, if you are really interested in this, Shumla does a lunch and learn, and they've actually collected more dates on the Pecos River style. And what's really happening is we're finding out that they both kind of occurred at the same time, which leaves the question, are these two separate cultures or is it the same culture with two different functions of style? And that opens up a whole big can of worms in the theory of style and how it relates to culture. So LPC, relative chronology. This is kind of how it has sat for the past 30 plus years. And this is how it is now. I kind of was pretty proud of that. It took me a while to get there. But with that said, we still don't know how that Pecos River style and that red linear style really match up. And what I did was doing some exploratory Bayesian modeling. I'm not going to get into it a whole bunch, but even with the old dates that have been accepted and it's in the literature, it shows that the very beginning of red linear style and the very beginning of Pecos River style have quite a bit of overlap. And so the idea that they could have come from the same culture group is plausible. Yeah, and this kind of just shows, the significant caveats that, we're going with, but we will skip this one. This is in my thesis if you really want to get into it, but it's beyond, I think, what we need to talk about right now. But returning to the dates that we have is so important. It's relating what we see in the red linear and what we see in the Pecos River style with what we see in the complete archaeological record. And during the emergence of the red linear style, the dates currently placed it at the end of the Eagle Nest Canyon phase, which is about 5,500 to 41 radiocarbon years. And a whole bunch of stuff happens then. Emily McQuistion has conducted a summed probability model using Earth oven dates from inside rock shelter deposits currently present in the Lower Pecos record, and her model indicated a huge population increase at this time period. Consequently, the subphase also exhibits some of the earliest cultural traits thought to actually define the Lower Pecos cultural area. Concurrently, we find the presence of figure eight sandals. We see ritualistic toolkits, intensification in earth oven technology, all in the record. Even peyote datura pops up at this time in the record. Something substantial is happening, and getting information with both the Pecos River style and the red linear style will help us further understand what is going on. So, circling back to the beginning, Carolyn always says, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. So, here we are. The purpose of the thesis was to further define the characteristics of red linear style and establish it within the temporal relationship across the rock art styles of the region. So we can kind of go through the checklist. Have I further defined the characteristics? I think so. I determined certain attributes are statistically significant and associated with other attributes. I identified significant patterns across the landscape, including elements like the height, the shape, the body, the penis emblems, all of these things. And I also discerned they were correlated with the biological sex markers. And each one of the males and the females also depicts very specific characteristics. Did I establish a temporal relationship with the other styles? Again, I think so. I think we pretty much nailed that. Obtained 6 radiocarbon dates from 5 different figures. One of them was from the type site, and I was able to support these also with replicate results and also with the calcium oxalates. So the dates that we have are pretty dang solid. So what are the next steps? Obtaining a wealth of good data opens up so many more questions that could take decades to attempt to even answer. I would definitely like to see more analysis on the anthropomorphic data, because this thesis barely scratched the surface of the potential of the data set that we have. I definitely like to advocate for people that are into principal cluster analysis or principal component analysis or cluster analysis, but that's way above my head. But I definitely think that there's some things interesting. More spatial analysis would be amazing. And even just looking at the zoomorphic or the animals of red linear styles, that's a whole other half of that data set. And that's just waiting to be, combed through and understood. But then also, just how does it fit in with Pecos River style? Is this one culture, or is this 2 separate cultures butting heads at a time period where everything else is going off? This is a big question, and this is a big question that will further help our understanding of the Middle Archaic and the Lower Pecos. We're right at that forefront of gleaning into that information. And so, we just need a holistic perspective. We can't just look at the stuff in the dirt. We can't just look at the stuff on the walls. These are the same people. They need to be analyzed all together to glean a more holistic understanding of what is going on. Summing up, 614 figures, 25 sites. We have rules. They are governed. We have a style. And what we've understood about the red linear style for the past 30 years is not likely what truly is. It's about 3,000 years older than what we thought. It has got identifiable diagnostic attributes. It's governed by rules, both stylistically and spatially across the landscape, and it's not younger than the Pecos River style, as previously mentioned. All right, so thanks for everybody that came and everybody that has helped on this project. It was not just me; it was a collective effort. There was a lot of heads going into it, a lot of research built upon, and of course, a lot of money, effort, time, sweat from a lot of different people that put into it. So, if you do want to look at my thesis, I kind of here went ahead and put up a QR code that you can scan and take a deeper look, and then you can write me your questions, comments, and complaints that way. But thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jared. That was probably one of the most interesting presentations that I've ever heard. You've
Good.
obviously done a lot of research here and are very passionate about it, and that's great. Um, we can get into some questions.
Sure.
Who's got any questions?
Jared, what about, individuality? And if you haven't watched on PBS this week, they have a Leonardo da Vinci program that was on the last couple nights. And he went so different in his paintings and stuff like that per the Middle Ages, late 1400s, early 1500s. Its style was so much different. But like you're looking at a couple thousand-year window there. Are you seeing big differences? I know the East and West you were talking about, the differences there, but would you see any kind of individuality where all of a sudden somebody would just go off in a different direction the way they were making the figures or the animals and stuff like that as to how they were drawing them and just doing it differently than granddad or grandma taught them how to do?
I think we need more research. That's kind of a cop out, so I'm not going to leave it at that. But what we did kind of see, or what it kind of so, first of all, we need more radiocarbon dates across to really get at those, little nitpickies of how it changed or if it changed through time. I think that's the best answer is we need more data. But with that said, the East West, the radiocarbon dates that we got actually seem to be it hints at the possibility that we are getting, as time progresses, we're getting anthropomorphs that are more stylized. So we are getting the anthropomorphs that are bigger. We are getting the ones that are center styled with the elaborate, phallus emblems and things like that. That's what it's hinting at. Now I can't say that for sure, but it kind of goes back to one thing that Dr. Solveig Turpin mentioned at Cueva Quebrada, and she said something along the lines that if I were to look at this anthropomorph and not see it within context of all of this other red linear figures, I would say it was almost Pecos River style like. And something like that, meaning like, are we seeing a progression? More or less, maybe, but we're seeing that there's some attributes that are kind of transitory between both Pecos River style and red linear, but they've always been completely looked at separately across time because they're uniquely different. They appear to have different functions. One's more mythological, like the Pecos River style, and the other is more of a day-to-day life aspect. So they've kept them separate, but I think as we start doing more research, those are the questions that we need to ask is, do we see change through time within that style? But that'll only be hinted at with more radiocarbon dates, for sure.
One other question, I know next to nothing about radiocarbon dating except for what I read about it. would campfires and the constant smoke coming off of campfires and leaving a film on the figures, would that have possibly skewed, obviously earlier dates instead of older dates from the paint itself? Can that skew it?
So the way the plasma oxidation plasma oxidation occurs is basically all of the processing. The end is you still send it to AMS to get radiocarbon dated, but the process is like extracting the organic compounds from the paint while leaving all of the organic compounds from, you know, fire, from the calcium oxalates, from the calcium carbonate on the back wall, because you're literally trying to date something that has carbon made out of its limestone.
Right.
So through that process, you take out a lot of the humic acids and everything like that that may be associated with carbon or, you know, fires. With that said, some of these sites have no instances, or there's not soot on the walls. Some of these are very open air sites, like the red linear type site is basically it's on a cliffside. There's no real place to even have a fire, and we were getting the same dates there too. So yeah,
Okay.
we're pretty confident in that. But
Okay,
yeah, I mean,
cool.
that's a good question, and you know, you definitely need to think about those things when you're trying to radiocarbon date paint on a wall for sure.
Anybody
Okay.
else?
Anybody other questions? Anything in the chat? I don't see anything in the chat.
I have a question. I
Okay.
have a question. Is there any sort of climate component to these different styles?
Yes, absolutely. And so the onset with the Eagle Nest sub period in the lower Pecos is a start of intensive drying. Gosh, what is it? It's called the ozona erosional period, where it gets so dry. And you should read some Turpin papers. I want one about, I think, like cyclical nucleation is one of them. But basically, we see a very heated, or we see an intensification in aridity, which also leads prone to more flooding in the area. And also it onsets this earth oven kind of, not revolution, but intensification, where it's almost no earth ovens on, or very few earth ovens on the landscape, to this just explosion where they're just pouring out of every rock art or rock shelter or anything like that. But yes, it does seem to be tied with an intensive heating, or an intensive arid event for sure. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good. Any more questions? No? Okay. Well, again, thank you very much, Gerald. I found it a fascinating presentation. Good luck in your future research, and maybe we hope to hear from you again in due course.
Absolutely. Thank
great.
you all so much. And I appreciate you letting me come and, you know, talk your ear off for a little bit. Good.
Oh,
But
we enjoy it. It's what we
yeah,
want every month. Yeah.
good.
Okay.
Maybe next time, you know, we'll probably do it when it's not my anniversary and I can come in.
We'll put that date in our diaries and try and avoid it next time.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll let everyone go. I hope to see several of you on Saturday at the Galabi site. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank
Take
you,
care, y'all.
Jared. Appreciate
Goodbye.
it.
No problem.
Take care. I'll see you soon, okay?
All right.
Bob, did you need me?
No, have we stop the recording, please?
You want me to stop
Yes,
the recording,
please.
Bob?
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah. Hold on.